The frost crept across the glass like ghostly fingers as Caleb Lawson stared at the empty stretch of road leading to his homestead. It was Sunday, and for the first time in 20 years, there would be no fresh loaf of bread waiting on his doorstep when dawn broke. His mother was gone, buried beneath 6 feet of hard winter earth just 3 days prior. Yet somehow, he still found himself watching that road as if her silhouette might materialize through the swirling snow. Montana Territory. 1883, winter had never felt so bitter. Caleb pulled the worn quilt tighter around his broad shoulders, his breath fogging the window of the modest cabin his father had built before the fever took him 15 years ago. At 32, Caleb had spent most of his life on this patch of land, working cattle alongside his mother, who refused to leave despite neighbors insisting a woman couldn't manage a ranch alone. But Margaret Lawson had been as sturdy as the mountains that framed their valley, and she'd proven them all wrong until pneumonia finally claimed what time and hardship couldn't. "You're being a fool," he muttered to himself, turning away from the window. The cabin felt too quiet, the absence of his mother's humming creating a void no amount of crackling from the fireplace could fill. Her rocking chair sat empty beside the hearth, the worn quilting basket still perched beside it as if waiting for her return. Sleep refused to claim him that night. When the first light of dawn seeped through the frost-covered windows, Caleb dragged himself from bed, pulled on his boots and coat, and stepped outside to tend to the animals. The bitter wind slapped his face, bringing tears to his eyes that he blamed entirely on the cold. Force of habit made him glance toward the front step, and there it was, a loaf of bread, still warm enough to melt the surrounding snow. Caleb froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. He approached the bread cautiously, as if it might disappear. The crust was golden brown, the exact shade his mother always achieved. He crouched down, touched it with trembling fingers, and found it still warm. A quick survey of the surroundings revealed fresh tracks in the snow, heading toward town. Someone had left this bread. Someone who knew his mother's Sunday tradition. The question haunted him through his chores. By midday, when the cattle were fed and the horses tended to, Caleb saddled his paint gelding and rode toward town, with the partially eaten loaf wrapped carefully in a cloth. The bread had tasted exactly like his mother's, a hint of honey, the perfect amount of salt, and that distinctive texture she'd mastered over decades of baking. Riverton wasn't much of a town. A general store, a saloon, a small church, the sheriff's office, and a scattering of homes and businesses stretched along a single dusty street. In winter, it seemed even smaller, with most folks keeping indoors except for necessary errands. He tied his horse outside the general store and stomped the snow from his boots before entering. Martha Wilson, who'd run the store with her husband for as long as anyone could remember, looked up from her ledger. "Caleb Lawson, I was wondering when you'd make it to town. How are you holding up?" The sympathy in her eyes made his throat tighten. "Managing," he said simply. "Martha, I found something strange this morning. Someone left fresh bread on my step, just like Mother used to do." Martha's expression shifted subtly. "Is that so? You wouldn't happen to know who might have done that, would you?" The older woman busied herself with rearranging already perfectly aligned canned goods. "Plenty of folks been concerned about you out there all alone, especially with this winter being so harsh. Could have been anyone." But her avoidance told him she knew more than she was saying. "Martha," he pressed, leaning across the counter, "that bread tasted exactly like my mother's recipe, not just similar, identical." She sighed, finally meeting his eyes. "Your mother gave her recipe to a few people before she passed. Said she was worried about you being out there with no one to look after you." "Who'd she give it to?" Martha hesitated. I'm not sure it's my place to. The bell above the door jingled as a gust of cold air swept into the store, along with a young woman bundled in a thick coat, a woolen scarf concealing most of her face. She carried a basket covered with a checkered cloth. When she saw Caleb, she froze momentarily before proceeding to the counter. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Wilson. I've brought those eggs you asked for." Her voice was soft but clear, with a musical quality that caught Caleb's attention. "Thank you, dear," Martha replied, giving her a peculiar look. "Ruby, have you met Caleb Lawson? His ranch is about 5 miles east of town." The young woman lowered her scarf, revealing a face that made Caleb's breath catch. She couldn't have been more than 25, with bright eyes the color of a summer sky and cheeks flushed from the cold. A strand of honey-colored hair had escaped her bonnet, curling against her temple. "I don't believe we've been formally introduced," she said, extending a gloved hand. "Ruby Anderson." Caleb took her hand, noticing flour beneath her fingernails. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Anderson. Are you new to Riverton? I don't recall seeing you around before." "Ruby moved here last spring to live with her aunt after her parents passed," Martha explained. "She's been helping out at the boarding house, doing cooking and such." Ruby nodded, her eyes darting away from Caleb's intense gaze. "I should be going. Mrs. Hollister will be expecting me back to help with supper." She turned to leave but paused when Caleb spoke again. "Miss Anderson, you wouldn't happen to know anything about a loaf of bread that appeared on my doorstep this morning, would you?" Her cheeks colored deeper. "That is. Your mother was very kind to me when I arrived in town. When I heard she was ill, I visited her. She was concerned about you and asked if I might." She trailed off, seemingly embarrassed. "So it was you," he said softly. "She made me promise to look after you in whatever small way I could," Ruby admitted. "She said you'd never admit to needing help, but that you shouldn't be without fresh bread on Sundays. It was important to her." Something shifted in Caleb's chest, not the loosening of grief exactly, but a small pocket of warmth amid the cold emptiness. "Thank you," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "It meant more than you know." Ruby smiled then, a gentle curve of her lips that transformed her face from pretty to beautiful. "It was the least I could do. Your mother taught me her recipe, said it was a family treasure. Would you allow me to walk you back to the boarding house?" Caleb found himself asking, surprising even himself with the request. Her eyes widened slightly. "That's kind of you, Mr. Lawson, but I wouldn't want to take you from your business." "My business is done," he replied, nodding a farewell to Martha, who was watching them with barely concealed interest. "And the company would be welcome." Outside, the snow had started again, fat flakes drifting lazily from a pearl-gray sky. They walked in silence for a few moments, their boots crunching on the fresh powder. "How did you meet my mother?" Caleb finally asked. Ruby adjusted her basket on her arm. "I was feeling rather lost when I first arrived. One Sunday after church, she noticed me sitting alone and invited me to dinner at your ranch. She said I reminded her of herself when she was younger." A fond smile touched her lips. "After that, she insisted I visit regularly. She taught me to bake, to quilt. Said I needed to learn proper homemaking skills if I ever hoped to catch a husband." Caleb couldn't help but chuckle. "That sounds like Mother, always planning for everyone's future." "She spoke of you constantly," Ruby added. "She was so proud of you, of the man you've become." The words touched a tender spot in Caleb's heart. They'd reached the boarding house, a 2-story structure with smoke curling from its chimney, promising warmth within. "Thank you for the bread," Caleb said, suddenly reluctant to end their conversation, "and for keeping your promise to my mother." Ruby hesitated at the bottom of the steps. "Will you be all right out there alone, Mr. Lawson? Your mother worried so." "Caleb," he corrected her, "and I've been managing the ranch for years now. I'll be fine." She studied him for a moment as if assessing the truth of his words. "Well then, Caleb, I suppose I'll see you next Sunday. I made a promise after all." He tipped his hat. "I'll look forward to it." And surprisingly, he meant it. The following Sunday, Caleb woke before dawn, his body tense with anticipation. He deliberately busied himself with indoor chores until the sun was well up, not wanting to appear too eager to check his doorstep. When he finally allowed himself to open the front door, there it was, another perfect loaf, still warm in the crisp morning air. This time, he caught a glimpse of a slender figure making her way down the long drive toward the road. Without thinking, he called out, "Miss Anderson." She turned, startled, then hesitated before walking back toward the cabin. She wore a different coat today, deep blue that complemented her eyes with a matching knitted scarf. "Good morning, Mr. Lawson," she said when she reached the porch. "I hope I didn't wake you." "Caleb," he reminded her, "and no, I've been up for hours. Would you like to come in for some coffee? It seems wrong to let you walk all this way in the cold without at least offering you something warm before your journey back." Ruby glanced toward town, then back at him. "I suppose I could spare a few minutes." Inside, Caleb suddenly saw his cabin through a stranger's eyes: the sparse furnishings, the unswept floor, his mother's belongings still exactly where she'd left them. Ruby didn't seem to mind, however, as she removed her coat and scarf and hung them on a peg by the door. "This is a lovely home," she said, moving toward the fireplace to warm her hands. "It's not much," Caleb replied, pouring coffee into his mother's second-best cups, "but it served us well enough." Ruby accepted the steaming cup with a grateful smile. "Your mother described every inch of this place to me. She loved it dearly." Her gaze traveled to the quilting basket. "She was teaching me to make a wedding ring quilt. I haven't had the heart to continue it without her guidance." "She'd want you to finish it," Caleb said softly. "She never left anything half done." Their conversation flowed easily after that, with Ruby asking about the ranch and Caleb finding himself talking more than he had in months. She told him about growing up in Missouri, losing her parents to influenza, and coming west to live with her mother's sister. "Aunt Beatrice was the only family I had left," she explained. "When she wrote offering me a place to stay, I didn't hesitate. There wasn't anything keeping me in Jefferson City anymore." "And do you like it here in Montana?" Caleb asked. Ruby considered the question. "It's different, wilder, but there's a beauty to it I never expected." She looked out the window at the snow-covered landscape. "Even in winter, when everything seems dead, there's still life beneath the surface, waiting." The observation struck Caleb as profound. Before he realized it, 2 hours had passed, and Ruby reluctantly said she needed to return to town for her duties at the boarding house. "Thank you for the coffee," she said as he helped her with her coat. "And the company." "Thank you for the bread," he replied, "and for keeping my mother's tradition alive." As she prepared to leave, a sudden gust of wind howled around the cabin, bringing with it a wall of snow. Caleb peered out the window with concern. "That doesn't look good. A storm's blowing in faster than predicted." Ruby pressed her face to the glass. "Oh dear, I should hurry then." "No," Caleb said firmly, "it's not safe. That's a true blizzard forming, and you'd be caught in the open with no shelter for miles." He shook his head. "You'll have to stay until it passes." Ruby's eyes widened. "Stay? But that wouldn't be proper." "I couldn't possibly, Miss Anderson. My mother would haunt me forever if I let you walk into that storm," he said seriously. "You can take her room. I'll sleep by the fire. With luck, it will blow over by morning." But the storm didn't blow over. For 2 days, the blizzard raged, trapping them in the cabin. What could have been an awkward situation instead became something unexpected. Ruby took over the kitchen, creating meals from Caleb's supplies that tasted better than anything he'd eaten since his mother fell ill. In return, he taught her how to play checkers using a board his father had carved years ago. They talked for hours by firelight, sharing stories and dreams. Ruby confessed her desire to someday have a place of her own, perhaps a small bakery. Caleb spoke of his plans to expand the ranch, to build on what his parents had started. On the third morning, they awoke to find the storm had passed, leaving behind a transformed landscape of pristine white. The sun glittered off the snow like scattered diamonds. "It's beautiful," Ruby breathed, standing on the porch. "Yes, it is," Caleb agreed, though he wasn't looking at the snow. After breakfast, Caleb saddled his horse. "I'll take you back to town. They'll be worried about you." The ride was peaceful, with Ruby seated in front of him, her back warm against his chest. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable. As they approached Riverton, however, Caleb felt a growing reluctance to end their time together. "I've enjoyed these past days," he said as they reached the boarding house, despite the circumstances. Ruby's smile was warm as he helped her down from the horse. "As have I. Thank you for your hospitality, Caleb. Will I?" He hesitated, then pressed on. "Will I see you next Sunday?" Her eyes sparkled. "I made a promise to your mother, remember?" Every Sunday, true to her word, Ruby appeared each Sunday with fresh bread. Sometimes Caleb would invite her in for coffee, and sometimes she would accept. They established a cautious friendship, with Caleb looking forward to their weekly meetings more than he cared to admit. As winter slowly released its grip on the land, their conversations deepened. Caleb found himself confiding his fears about managing the ranch alone, while Ruby shared her struggles to find her place in a town where she was still considered an outsider. One Sunday in early March, when the first hints of spring were softening the air, Caleb made a decision. He rode into town early and knocked on the boarding house door, asking for Ruby. Mrs. Hollister, the owner, gave him a knowing look before calling Ruby from the kitchen. "Caleb," Ruby said, surprised to see him, "is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her. "I was wondering if you might like to go for a ride with me today. There's something I'd like to show you." Curiosity lit her eyes. "Let me get my coat." He took her to a meadow nestled between two hills on his property. Though patches of snow still dotted the ground, green shoots were pushing through in places, and a small creek gurgled with melting runoff. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Caleb explained as they dismounted. "My father proposed to my mother here. She once told me that even in the darkest times, she would come here and remember the happiness of that day." Ruby touched a budding wildflower with gentle fingers. "It's lovely. Thank you for sharing it with me." "Ruby," Caleb began, suddenly nervous. "These past months, your friendship has meant more to me than I can say. You've brought light back into my life when I thought all was darkness." She turned to him, her eyes soft with understanding. "I know we haven't known each other very long," he continued, "but I feel as if I've been waiting for you my whole life. Would you consider courting me properly, with an eye toward something more permanent in the future?" A smile bloomed across her face, more beautiful than any spring flower. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd ever ask." Their courtship progressed through the changing seasons. Ruby continued her Sunday bread deliveries, but now they were followed by shared meals, picnics by the creek, and long rides across Caleb's land. She helped him birth calves in the spring and mend fences in the summer. He escorted her to church socials and the Independence Day celebration in town. By autumn, when the aspens turned golden and the first frost threatened, Caleb knew he couldn't wait any longer. He brought Ruby back to the meadow, now dressed in the rich colors of fall, and dropped to one knee. "Ruby Anderson, you came into my life when I thought all joy had left it. You kept a promise to my mother that became a gift to me." He pulled a small ring from his pocket, his mother's wedding band, polished to a bright shine. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears glistened in her eyes as she whispered, "Yes." They were married on the first anniversary of his mother's passing, not as a sad remembrance, but as a way to bring joy back to that date. The ceremony was held in the small church in Riverton, with what seemed like the entire town in attendance. Ruby wore a simple white dress with a crown of autumn flowers in her hair. Caleb couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him, his heart so full he thought it might burst. That night, as he carried his bride across the threshold of the cabin that would now be their home, Caleb felt his mother's presence not as a ghost, but as a blessing. He brought Ruby to the bedroom that had been newly furnished with a larger bed and fresh curtains sewn by Martha Wilson. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he whispered before kissing her. Their first months of marriage passed in a haze of happiness. They settled into a comfortable routine, with Ruby transforming the cabin into a true home while Caleb worked the ranch. On Sundays, they baked bread together, continuing the tradition but making it their own. Winter returned, bringing with it memories for Caleb, but the grief was gentler now, softened by new joy. On the anniversary of the day Ruby had been caught in the blizzard at his cabin, she presented him with a special gift, a handmade quilt in the wedding ring pattern his mother had been teaching her. "I finished it," she said softly. "For us." As they lay beneath it that night, Caleb held Ruby close, marveling at how much had changed in a year. "Do you ever think about how we met?" he asked. "How one loaf of bread led to all this?" Ruby traced the lines of his face with tender fingers. "Your mother knew exactly what she was doing when she taught me that recipe. She told me once that bread is more than food, it's communion, a way of saying I care without words." "She was a wise woman," Caleb murmured. "She also told me something else," Ruby said, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. "She said that Lawson men make excellent fathers." Caleb froze, his heart suddenly racing. "Ruby, are you saying?" She nodded, her eyes shining. "By next harvest there will be 3 of us in this house." Their daughter, Margaret Rose Lawson, was born on a bright September morning, with a strong cry and a shock of dark hair like her father's. Caleb paced outside while the midwife and Martha Wilson attended Ruby, nearly wearing a path in the floorboards until he heard his child's first wails. When they placed his daughter in his arms, wrapped in the wedding ring quilt, Caleb felt a circle completing. Here was the future his and Ruby's love made manifest, carrying forward the legacy of those who had come before. "She has your mother's chin," Ruby observed tiredly from the bed. "And your eyes." "She's perfect," Caleb whispered, overwhelmed by the tiny life he held. As their daughter grew, so did their happiness. The ranch prospered under their joint care, with Ruby proving to be as capable a partner as Caleb could have wished for. They added a small bakery to their enterprises, with Ruby selling bread and pastries in town twice a week. Her creations became famous throughout the county, drawing customers from neighboring towns. Their family expanded again 2 years later with the arrival of a son, Samuel James, a sturdy boy with his mother's blue eyes and sunny disposition. The cabin that had once felt too empty to Caleb now echoed with children's laughter and the constant bustle of family life. On Sundays, Ruby still baked special bread, teaching the children as they grew old enough to help. It became a family ceremony, the measuring, the kneading, the waiting for the dough to rise. Caleb would watch them, his heart full, thinking of his mother and how her simple tradition had brought him so much. 5 years into their marriage, on a warm spring evening, Caleb and Ruby sat on the porch swing, watching their children chase fireflies in the yard. Margaret, now 4, was serious and determined, while 2-year-old Samuel tottered after her with delighted squeals. "You remember that first winter?" Ruby asked, leaning her head against his shoulder. "How lost you seemed." Caleb wrapped his arm around her. "I remember the morning I found your bread on my step. It felt like a miracle." "It was just bread," she said with a smile. "No," he disagreed. "It was hope, when I thought I had none left." Ruby took his hand, placing it over her rounded belly where their third child grew. "Your mother told me something once that I've never forgotten. She said, 'Love is like bread, Ruby. It needs simple ingredients, careful tending, and time to rise. But if you do it right, it nourishes you for a lifetime.'" Caleb's throat tightened with emotion. She would have loved seeing us now. "She does see us," Ruby said with certainty. "Every time we bake her bread, every time we love each other and these children, she's here." As darkness fell and they called the children inside, Caleb paused on the porch, looking up at the vast Montana sky with its blanket of stars. "Thank you, Mother," he whispered, "for everything." Inside, Ruby was tucking the children into bed, her voice soft as she told them stories of their grandmother, how brave she was, how she had kept the ranch going against all odds, and how she had left bread on the doorstep every Sunday as a sign of love. Later, as Caleb and Ruby prepared for bed themselves, he pulled her into his arms, breathing in the scent of her hair, still carrying traces of the bread she had baked that morning. "What are you thinking?" she asked, noting his thoughtful expression. "I'm thinking about how one loaf of bread changed everything," he said. "How my mother's last gift to me was you. And my first gift to you was bread," Ruby mused. "But not the greatest," Caleb replied, placing his hand on her stomach where their child grew. "Not by far." Their third child, another daughter they named Elizabeth Grace, was born in the summer. She had her mother's golden hair and her father's quiet temperament. With 3 children under the age of 6, the cabin became a bustling, joyful place, filled with the chaos and wonder of family life. As the years passed, Caleb and Ruby watched their children grow, each developing their own strengths and personalities. Margaret, the eldest, showed a talent for numbers and helped her father with the ranch accounts from an early age. Samuel had a natural way with animals that made him invaluable during calving season. Elizabeth, the youngest, inherited her mother's gift for baking, standing on a stool beside Ruby at the age of 3, her small hands covered in flour as she learned to knead dough. The ranch expanded, with Caleb purchasing neighboring land when it became available. They built a larger home when the children outgrew the cabin, but they kept the original structure standing, a testament to the generations that had come before. Through it all, the Sunday bread remained a constant. Even when life became busy with school and ranch work and the 1,000 tasks that filled their days, Ruby never missed a Sunday. It had become more than tradition. It was the heartbeat of their family. On the 20th anniversary of Margaret Lawson's passing, Caleb rode alone to the small cemetery where his parents were buried. The spring grass was lush around the markers, and wildflowers nodded in the gentle breeze. He dismounted and stood before his mother's grave, hat in hand. "I wish you could see them, Mother," he said quietly. "Margaret's 15 now, smart as a whip and stubborn as you were. Samuel's 13 and already taller than Ruby. And Elizabeth, she's 11 and can bake bread as good as you ever did." He smiled, remembering his mother's calloused hands shaping dough with practiced ease. "Ruby taught them all your recipe, said it was their inheritance." A warm breeze touched his face, almost like a caress. "You were right to send her to me," he continued. "I would have wasted away alone in that cabin, too proud to admit I needed help. But that bread on my doorstep." He shook his head, still amazed at how such a simple thing had changed his life. When he returned home, he found his family waiting. Ruby had prepared a special dinner to mark the day, and the children had picked wildflowers to decorate the table. As they ate together, sharing memories and laughter, Caleb looked around at the faces he loved most in the world and felt profoundly grateful. Later that evening, when the children were in bed, Caleb and Ruby stood on the porch of their new home, looking out at the land that had sustained their family for generations. "You ever wonder," Ruby asked, "what would have happened if your mother hadn't taught me to bake that bread? If she hadn't extracted that promise from me?" Caleb considered this. "I believe we would have found each other somehow. Some things are meant to be." Ruby smiled up at him, the years having only added character to her beauty. Silver threaded through her golden hair now, and fine lines marked the corners of her eyes, but to Caleb, she was more lovely than ever. "Perhaps," she agreed. "But I'm grateful for the path we took, for that first loaf of bread and everyone after." Caleb pulled her close, thinking of the journey that had brought them here from grief to love, from loneliness to family. "As am I, my love, as am I." The next Sunday, as was their tradition, the entire family gathered in the kitchen to bake together. Ruby directed the operation with practiced ease, assigning each person their task. Margaret measured the flour with precise movements, Samuel kneaded the dough with strong hands, and Elizabeth shaped the loaves with artistic flair. Caleb watched them, his heart full of contentment. As the bread baked, filling the house with its irresistible aroma, Ruby caught his eye and smiled the same smile that had captivated him all those years ago when she'd stood in Martha Wilson's store with flour beneath her fingernails. In that moment, Caleb knew with absolute certainty that every hardship in his life had led him exactly where he was meant to be. When the bread emerged from the oven, golden and perfect, they gathered around the table. Before they broke the first loaf, Caleb raised his glass. "To my mother," he said, "who knew that love like bread could sustain us through the darkest winter." "To grandmother," the children echoed. Ruby squeezed his hand. "And to all the Sundays past and those yet to come." As they shared the warm bread, passing it from hand to hand, Caleb thought of how a simple tradition had become the foundation of their family, a reminder that even in loss, new beginnings were possible, and that love, once planted, could grow and flourish for generations to come. Outside, the Montana sky stretched vast and blue above their home, promising another season of growth, another year of harvests, another cycle of life on the land they loved. And inside, surrounded by the family they had built together, Caleb and Ruby Lawson continued the legacy that had begun with a single loaf of bread left on a doorstep one snowy Sunday morning so many years before.